The Grand Symphony Hall stood tall and proud in the heart of the city, its marble columns and crystal chandeliers a testament to wealth and culture that few could truly access. For most visitors, the hall represented an evening of elegance, a chance to dress in their finest clothes and immerse themselves in the beauty of classical music. But for Eleanor Jenkins, the hall was simply her workplace, the place where she mopped floors, cleaned bathrooms, and emptied trash bins for just above minimum wage. Eleanor had been working at the Symphony Hall for almost 5 years now. At 32, she had the kind of face that showed both strength and weariness, the face of someone who had seen dreams rise and fall but kept moving forward anyway. Her dark brown skin had a warm glow to it, even under the harsh fluorescent lights of the service corridors where she spent most of her time. She wore the standard dark blue uniform of the cleaning staff, a badge with her name pinned neatly to her chest, and practical shoes that eased the burden of standing for 8-hour shifts. Tonight was like many others. The Symphony Hall was hosting world-famous pianist Victor Harrington, whose name appeared on billboards throughout the city for weeks. Eleanor had heard snippets of his music during sound checks, the powerful notes floating through the halls and seeping under doorways, finding their way to her ears as she worked. There was something in his playing that made her pause occasionally, cloth in hand, eyes closed for just a moment before reality called her back to her duties. "Jenkins, the reception room needs attention before the guests arrive," called out Mr. Peterson, the facilities manager. A balding man with a permanent frown, Peterson took special pleasure in reminding the cleaning staff of their place in the Symphony Hall hierarchy. "Yes, sir. I'll get right to it," Eleanor replied. Gathering her cleaning cart and heading toward the reception hall, the room was magnificent, all gold trim and velvet curtains, with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city lights. Eleanor worked quickly and methodically, dusting the ornate picture frames, polishing the surfaces until they gleamed, and making sure not a speck of dust could be found on the grand piano that stood in the center of the room. She couldn't help but run her finger lightly along its edge, feeling the smooth, expensive wood beneath her fingertips. "Don't even think about touching the keys," Peterson said sharply from the doorway, making Eleanor jump. "Harrington is very particular about his instruments. No one touches them before a performance." Eleanor nodded, pulling her hand back as if burned. "Of course not, sir. I was just dusting." "Well, finish up quickly. The performance starts in an hour, and this room needs to be empty of staff." The way he hesitated made it clear he was searching for a polite word, when what he really meant was people like her, the invisible ones who made everything run smoothly but weren't meant to be seen. As the evening progressed, Eleanor worked throughout the building, always keeping to the shadows, always stepping aside when guests in expensive clothes passed by. From the service corridors, she could hear the thunderous applause as Harrington finished his concert. Soon after, the reception began, and the sound of clinking glasses and sophisticated laughter filled the air. Eleanor was emptying trash bins in the corridors when she heard it, the sound of the grand piano being played in the reception hall. The melody was beautiful, complex, yet somehow playful. Before she realized what she was doing, Eleanor had moved closer to the room, drawn by the music like a moth to flame. Through the crack in the door, she could see Harrington at the piano, surrounded by admirers. He played with obvious showmanship, his fingers dancing across the keys while he maintained conversation with those around him. Eleanor stood transfixed, her cleaning cart forgotten beside her. "Magical, isn't it?" The soft voice beside her made Eleanor jump. She turned to find an older woman in a simple but elegant black dress standing nearby. Unlike the other guests, she didn't look at Eleanor as if she were invisible. "Yes, ma'am," Eleanor whispered, embarrassed at being caught listening. "I should get back to work." "The way you were watching him," the woman said thoughtfully. "You appreciate music?" Eleanor hesitated, then nodded. "I do." "I'm Rose Winters," the woman said, extending her hand. "I'm with the Symphony's board of directors." "Eleanor Jenkins," she replied, quickly wiping her hand on her uniform before shaking Rose's. "I'm with the cleaning staff." Instead of the dismissive nod Eleanor expected, Rose smiled warmly. "A pleasure to meet you, Eleanor. Don't let me keep you from your work, but perhaps music finds its way to us in unexpected moments, doesn't it?" Before Eleanor could respond, Rose had slipped back into the reception. Something about the brief exchange left Eleanor feeling seen in a way she rarely experienced at the Symphony Hall. The evening wore on, and the reception showed no signs of ending. Harrington was clearly enjoying being the center of attention, playing brief musical pieces between conversations, accepting compliments with practiced humility. Eleanor continued her work, emptying trash bins and cleaning spills as discreetly as possible. As midnight approached, many of the guests had left, leaving only Harrington's close circle and a few music critics. The atmosphere had grown more relaxed, with louder laughter and more daring jokes. Eleanor entered the reception hall quietly, keeping to the edges as she collected discarded napkins and empty champagne glasses. She was so focused on being invisible that she didn't realize Harrington had stopped playing and was looking directly at her. It wasn't until someone cleared their throat loudly that she looked up and found herself the center of attention. "You," Harrington called out, his voice carrying the slight slur of someone who'd had too much champagne. "You've been hovering around all evening. Do you like piano music?" Eleanor froze, her hands full of trash, aware of every eye in the room on her. "Yes, sir," she managed to say. "Your playing is beautiful." Harrington smiled, but there was something unkind in it. "A music critic from the cleaning staff. How delightful." There was scattered laughter from his friends. "Tell me, what's your favorite piece?" Eleanor felt her chest tighten. She knew he was making fun of her, but she answered honestly anyway. "I've always loved Chopin's Nocturnes, sir. Especially Opus 9, No. 2. This seemed to surprise Harrington. He raised an eyebrow. "Indeed? And here I thought you might say something from the top 40. More laughter followed, crueler this time. Eleanor began to back away, wanting nothing more than to disappear into the service corridors. But Harrington wasn't finished with his entertainment. Wait, he called, waving her back. "Since you're such an admirer, perhaps you'd like to show us what you can do." He stood up from the piano bench with an exaggerated bow, gesturing toward it. "Please grace us with your talents." The room fell silent, then erupted in uncomfortable laughter. Eleanor stood frozen, her uniform suddenly feeling too tight, too obvious. She knew what this was, a wealthy, privileged man making a joke at her expense, expecting her to stammer an excuse and flee in embarrassment.
Giving him and his friends a funny story to tell later. "I really should finish my work."
"Sir?" Eleanor said quietly, fighting to keep her voice steady. "Oh, come now," Harrington insisted, his smile never reaching his eyes. "Just a little demonstration. We're all friends here." Someone from his entourage called out, "Yes, show us what you've got. We need some entertainment." Eleanor looked around the room. Most faces showed amusement or awkward discomfort, but in the corner stood Rose Winters, watching with an unreadable expression. Their eyes met briefly, and something in Rose's steady gaze gave Eleanor a spark of courage. Carefully, Eleanor set down her trash bag and removed her cleaning gloves, tucking them into her pocket. Her heart hammered in her chest as she slowly walked toward the grand piano, a Steinway that probably cost more than she would earn in 10 years. The room watched in awkward silence as she approached, clearly expecting a disaster. Harrington stepped aside with exaggerated courtesy, sweeping his arm toward the piano bench. "The stage is yours," he said, his tone making it clear he expected her to embarrass herself. Eleanor sat down carefully, adjusting her position on the bench. The keys before her gleamed white and black, both familiar and intimidating. It had been so long since she'd played on an instrument of this quality. She placed her hands gently on the keys, feeling their cool smoothness beneath her fingertips. A hush fell over the room as everyone waited for what they assumed would be an awkward plunking of random notes. Eleanor closed her eyes for a moment, took a deep breath, and remembered who she used to be, before life had taken unexpected turns. Her fingers hovered over the keys for what seemed like an eternity, and then she began to play. Eleanor's fingers touched the keys, and in that moment, the world around her melted away. The first notes of Chopin's Ballade No. 1 in G minor filled the reception hall, delicate at first like raindrops on a window, then building with gathering intensity. Her hands moved with the muscle memory of thousands of hours of practice, finding each note with precision and feeling that came from somewhere deep within her soul. The laughter died in Harrington's throat. His smug smile faded, replaced by an expression of disbelief as he watched the cleaning lady transform before his eyes. Her back straightened, her chin lifted, and her entire being seemed to glow with a quiet dignity that made her uniform fade into insignificance. The piece Eleanor chose was no simple melody. It was one of Chopin's most challenging compositions, a piece that told a complex story through its dramatic shifts in tone and tempo. It began gently but grew into a tempest of emotion, requiring not just technical skill but a depth of feeling that couldn't be faked. As she played, memories washed over her. The small apartment where she grew up, her mother working double shifts as a nurse to pay for the second-hand upright piano they'd found at a garage sale, the elderly piano teacher from the church who had recognized something special in the quiet girl with quick fingers and had given her lessons for free. The regional competitions she'd won, the scholarship to the prestigious music academy, the dream that had once seemed within reach. The room had fallen completely silent. Even the servers who had been clearing glasses had stopped to listen, standing motionless with trays in their hands. Harrington's friends, who moments ago had been ready to laugh at what they thought would be an embarrassing display, now sat with mouths slightly open, cocktails forgotten in their hands. Eleanor's fingers danced across the keys, drawing out the story hidden in the music, moments of tender beauty giving way to passages of such technical difficulty that even accomplished pianists often struggled with them. Yet she played with a fluidity that made the impossible look effortless, each note precisely where it needed to be. Harrington moved closer to the piano, his face a mask of concentration. He was no longer seeing the cleaning lady in her blue uniform. He was hearing a musician of extraordinary talent. His trained ear could detect no flaws, no hesitations, only an interpretation of Chopin that was both technically flawless and emotionally raw. One of the music critics present, a notoriously harsh judge of talent who wrote for the city's most prestigious arts magazine, had taken out his phone and was recording the performance, his face showing the rare expression of someone witnessing something truly unexpected. As Eleanor reached the piece's most challenging section, her fingers flying across the keyboard in a blur of movement, a small gasp escaped from someone in the room. The tempo increased, the dynamics swelled, and the music filled every corner of the reception hall, spilling out into the corridor where other cleaning staff had gathered, drawn by the sound of something remarkable happening. Mr. Peterson, who had been checking on the cleanup progress, stood in the doorway, his clipboard hanging loosely in his hand, his perpetual frown replaced by slack-jawed amazement, as he watched Eleanor, the same woman he'd ordered around and dismissed countless times, command the room with her artistry. Rose, Winters observed from her place by the window, a small smile playing on her lips. Unlike the others, she showed no shock, only a quiet satisfaction, as if a theory she'd long held was finally being proven right. As the piece approached its conclusion, Eleanor's whole body seemed to be part of the music, swaying slightly with the crescendos, leaning into the emotional peaks and valleys of Chopin's masterpiece. Her eyes remained closed, not out of nervousness, but because she was somewhere else entirely, somewhere beyond the judgment and expectations of the people watching her. The final notes resonated through the hall, powerful and resolute, before fading into a silence so complete you could hear the soft patter of rain that had begun falling outside. For several heartbeats, no one moved or spoke. Eleanor's hands rested gently on the keys. Her head bowed slightly as she let the last echoes of the music fade away. Then, like a dam breaking, the room erupted in applause. Not the polite, measured applause of society people being charitable, but the genuine, spontaneous reaction of humans who had just witnessed something extraordinary. Several people rose to their feet, including the harsh critic who was still clutching his phone, capturing her stunned expression as she opened her eyes and seemed to remember where she was. "My God," Harrington whispered, approaching the piano with newfound respect in his eyes. "Who are you?" Eleanor looked down at her hands, suddenly self-conscious as reality came rushing back. "Just the cleaning lady, sir," she replied, her voice barely audible above the continued applause. "No," he said, shaking his head firmly. "No cleaning lady plays like that. That was conservatory level. That was concert hall quality." One of the critics pushed forward. "Where did you study?" he demanded, notebook now in hand. "Who was your teacher?" Eleanor rose from the bench, uncomfortable with the attention now focused on her. "It was a long time ago," she said, moving to step away from the piano. "I should get back to work." "Wait," Harrington said, reaching out but stopping short of touching her arm. The condescension had vanished from his manner, replaced by genuine curiosity. Please, what's your name again? Eleanor Jenkins. Ms. Jenkins, he said, testing the name with a new respect. I don't understand. With talent like that, why are you... He gestured vaguely at her uniform, unable to finish the question that seemed suddenly rude. Eleanor's eyes flashed briefly with an old pain. Life doesn't always go as planned, Mr. Harrington. Not for everyone. But you're extraordinary, insisted one of the women who had laughed at her earlier. I've attended concerts my whole life, and I've never heard Chopin played with such soul. Eleanor looked at the woman, then around the room at all the faces now watching her with fascination rather than amusement. The dramatic shift in their perception was almost dizzying. 5 minutes ago she had been invisible. Now she was the center of attention. Mr. Peterson pushed his way through the small crowd. Jenkins, what is going on here? You're supposed to be cleaning. Not. He couldn't seem to find the words for what he had just witnessed. I believe Ms. Jenkins was providing us with the highlight of our evening, Rose Winters said, stepping forward. Her calm voice carried a subtle authority that made Peterson hesitate. And I, for one, would very much like to hear more. As would I, agreed the harsh critic who had finally lowered his phone. Ms. Jenkins, I'm Thomas Chen from the Arts Quarterly. I would be very interested in hearing your story. Eleanor glanced at the door, suddenly feeling trapped. This wasn't how her evening was supposed to go. She had spent years being invisible, finding a strange comfort in the predictability of her life, even if it wasn't the life she had once dreamed of. Now all these eyes on her made her feel exposed, as if a private part of herself had been revealed without her consent. I really should finish my shift, she said, looking around for her cleaning cart. I need this job. Your job is safe, Rose assured her with a pointed look at Peterson. I think we can all agree that this is a rather exceptional circumstance. Harrington was still staring at Eleanor with a mixture of admiration and confusion. What happened? He asked quietly, his earlier mockery forgotten. Why aren't you playing professionally? With that level of talent, Eleanor took a deep breath. She rarely talked about her past, had learned to lock away the disappointment and focus on surviving. But something about the genuine interest in Harrington's face made her decide to answer honestly. I was once, she said, or I was on my way. I had a scholarship to the National Conservatory, but then my mother got sick, cancer. I had to drop out to care for her and my younger sisters. By the time she passed, the scholarship was gone, and so were our savings. I tried to get back into music, but she shrugged, the simple gesture conveying years of closed doors and mounting bills. Life happens. The room had gone quiet again, but with a different quality now. A hushed respect for the dignity with which she told her story. Without self-pity or dramatics, how long have you worked here? Rose asked. Almost 5 years, Eleanor replied. It pays the bills, and sometimes, she glanced at the piano. Sometimes I get to hear beautiful music. And when was the last time you played? Before tonight? Harrington asked. Eleanor gave a small, sad smile. Really played on a proper piano? Years. I have a keyboard in my apartment, nothing special, just enough to keep my fingers moving. My neighbors probably think I'm crazy, playing to myself late at night after shifts. Chen, the critic, was scribbling notes frantically. This is remarkable, he muttered. Absolutely remarkable. Eleanor shook her head slightly. It's really not. I'm sure there are lots of people with unfulfilled dreams working jobs they never expected to have. Perhaps, Rose said thoughtfully. But not all of them can play Chopin like you just did. An uncomfortable silence hung in the air after Eleanor's honest words about her circumstances. The contrast between her extraordinary talent and her current situation seemed to have sobered the room. Even Harrington, who had begun the evening by mocking her, now looked genuinely troubled by the waste of such remarkable ability. Would you play something else? He asked, his voice gentle now, all traces of condescension gone.
Please?
Eleanor hesitated, glancing at Mr. Peterson, who seemed torn between his usual need to enforce workplace rules and the unusual situation unfolding before him. Rose Winters gave him a slight nod, and he reluctantly stepped back, giving what passed for permission with a grudging shrug. One more piece, Eleanor agreed, settling back onto the bench. This time she chose Debussy's Clair de Lune, its dreamlike quality filling the room with a sense of moonlight and quiet wonder. She played with the same natural grace, her fingers caressing rather than striking the keys, drawing out the haunting melody with perfect control of tempo and dynamics. Thomas Chen, the critic, was filming again. His professional skepticism completely dissolved. Harrington stood with his arms crossed, watching her technique with the sharp eye of a fellow pianist. Occasionally he would nod slightly, recognizing a particularly skillful interpretation of a difficult passage. When the final notes faded, no one clapped immediately. The music had cast a spell that no one wanted to break. Finally, Rose was the first to approach Eleanor. "Ms. Jenkins," she said firmly, "we need to talk about your future." "My future?" Eleanor echoed, confused. "I have a job. It's not glamorous, but it's a criminal waste of your talent," Harrington interrupted, surprising everyone with his vehemence. The man who had started the evening by making her the butt of his joke now seemed genuinely angry at the circumstances that had led her here. "You should be performing, recording, teaching masterclasses, not—" He stopped himself, perhaps realizing how his words might sound. "Not cleaning up after people like us," Rose finished for him, her directness cutting through the awkwardness. "He's right, though, perhaps lacking in tact." She gave Harrington a pointed look before turning back to Eleanor. "Talent like yours is rare, Ms. Jenkins. It deserves to be heard." Eleanor stood up from the piano bench, suddenly feeling overwhelmed. "That was a different life," she said quietly. "I've made my peace with how things turned out." "Have you really?" Chen asked, joining them. "Because when you play, it doesn't look like someone who's made peace with anything. It looks like someone who was born to do exactly this." Eleanor didn't answer immediately. The truth was complicated. She had learned to accept her circumstances, to find small joys where she could, to be grateful for the stability her job provided. But had she made peace with the death of her dream? The way her heart still ached when she heard beautiful music suggested otherwise. "I have responsibilities," she finally said. "Bills to pay. My youngest sister is still in college. I help with her tuition." "I can't just what?" Rose pressed gently. "Just reclaim your gift? Just allow yourself to be who you clearly are?" Before Eleanor could respond, there was a commotion at the doorway. A young man with a camera had appeared, apparently alerted by someone at the reception. "Is it true?" he asked breathlessly, looking around the room. "Someone said there's a janitor playing like a concert pianist in here?" Mr. Peterson moved to intercept him. "This is a private event. Press isn't allowed." "Let him in," Harrington said suddenly, his expression thoughtful. When Peterson hesitated, Harrington added more firmly, "I said let him in. This is still my reception, isn't it?" The young reporter entered, camera at the ready. "I'm Alex from City Beat," he explained. "We cover local arts and culture. Someone sent us a text about an amazing performer." His eyes settled on Eleanor in her cleaning uniform, standing by the grand piano. "Is that her?" Several heads nodded. Eleanor felt her cheeks grow warm as the camera turned toward her. She wasn't used to being the center of attention, especially not dressed in her work clothes, with her hair pulled back in a simple ponytail and not a trace of makeup on her face. "Would you play something for our viewers?" Alex asked eagerly, already setting up his camera on a nearby table. "We're live streaming tonight's cultural events around the city." "I don't think," Eleanor began, but Harrington cut her off. "The world deserves to hear you," he said quietly. "Even if it's just this once on this random Tuesday night in this room. Don't you think?" Eleanor looked around at the faces watching her expectantly. Something was happening that she couldn't quite control, a moment that felt both terrifying and strangely inevitable. Part of her wanted to flee to the familiar safety of the service corridors, to disappear back into the invisible world she'd inhabited for years. But another part, a part she'd tried to silence for too long, wanted to sit back down at that piano and play until her fingers hurt. "One piece," she agreed finally, "for your live stream. Then I really do need to get back to work." She sat down once more, took a deep breath, and began to play Rachmaninoff's Prelude in G minor. It was a bold choice, dark, passionate, technically demanding, but she surrendered herself to it completely. Her body swayed with the music, her face reflecting every emotional shift in the turbulent piece. This wasn't just impressive playing. This was artistry of the highest order. The live stream counter ticked upward as viewers began to tune in, drawn by the compelling sight of a woman in a cleaner's uniform, playing with the skill and passion of a concert performer. Comments scrolled rapidly. "Who is she? Where did she come from? Why have we never heard of her before?" By the time Eleanor struck the final powerful chord, The viewer count had reached over 2,000. The room erupted in applause once more, but this time it was joined by the virtual applause of strangers across the city who had just witnessed something extraordinary. Alex was beaming as he checked his phone. "This is going viral already," he said excitedly. "People are sharing it everywhere, Ms." He looked at Eleanor questioningly. "Jenkins," she supplied reluctantly. "Eleanor Jenkins. Ms. Jenkins, would you be willing to answer a few questions for our viewers? They're absolutely loving this." Eleanor glanced at the cleaning cart still waiting in the corner, at Mr. Peterson's conflicted expression, at Rose's encouraging smile. Her carefully constructed routine life was unraveling before her eyes, and she wasn't sure whether to be terrified or exhilarated. "I suppose I could answer a few questions," she conceded, smoothing her uniform nervously. "Perfect. So Eleanor, tell us your story. How does someone with your obvious talent end up working as a cleaner at the Symphony Hall?" Under the bright light of Alex's camera, Eleanor told her story once more, this time to an audience of thousands rather than a room full of elite music patrons. She spoke of her early love for piano, of the sacrifices her mother had made to nurture her talent, of the scholarship that had seemed like the answer to all their prayers. She explained about her mother's illness, her difficult choice to put family above career, the gradual closing of doors as life's responsibilities mounted. She spoke without self-pity, with a dignity that made her simple story powerfully compelling. In the comments, viewers expressed outrage at the waste of her talent, admiration for her family loyalty, and demands to know how they could help her return to music. "And working here, surrounded by music you can't participate in. That must be difficult," Alex prompted. Eleanor thought for a moment. "Sometimes," she admitted, "but there's also a kind of bittersweet joy in it. I get to hear beautiful performances, even if I'm just emptying trash bins while they happen. Music is still in my life, just differently than I'd planned." "But clearly you've kept up your skills," Alex pressed. "That was world-class playing we just heard." Eleanor gave a small smile. "I practice on a cheap keyboard in my apartment. My neighbors are very understanding." As the interview continued, Thomas Chen was on his phone speaking rapidly to someone. Harrington was deep in conversation with Rose Winters, both of them gesturing animatedly while occasionally glancing at Eleanor. Whatever they were discussing seemed urgent and important. The live-stream comments continued to pour in, with viewers demanding to know if there was a way to hear more of Eleanor's playing, if she had recordings available, if she ever performed publicly. The virtual audience was as captivated by her story as by her music, the combination of exceptional talent and humble circumstances, creating a narrative that resonated deeply. "Ms. Jenkins," Rose said, approaching as the interview wound down, "I believe this evening is just the beginning of something important. Would you be willing to meet with me tomorrow to discuss some possibilities?" Eleanor looked uncertain. "I have a shift tomorrow. I can't just—" "I'll speak with your supervisor," Rose assured her with another pointed look at Peterson. "The Symphony Board has some discretion in these matters." "What kind of possibilities?" Eleanor asked cautiously. Rose and Harrington exchanged glances. "Let's just say," Harrington replied, "that talent like yours doesn't come along often. When it does, the music world has a responsibility to nurture it, not waste it. Even if we're a little late to the game." Eleanor felt dizzy with the speed at which her life was suddenly changing direction. Just hours ago, she had been invisible, anonymous, just another worker in a blue uniform. Now strangers across the city knew her name, her story, her deepest passion. "I don't know what to say," she admitted, looking around at these people who suddenly saw her as someone worth knowing, worth helping. "Say yes," Rose urged gently. "Say yes to tomorrow, at least. We can figure out the rest as we go." Eleanor looked at the piano, then at her cleaning cart, symbols of her two lives, the one she'd dreamed of and the one she'd settled for. For the first time in years, she allowed herself to feel something dangerous. Hope. "Yes," she said quietly. "Yes to tomorrow." Eleanor barely slept that night. Each time she closed her eyes, she saw the faces of the people who had watched her play, first shocked, then moved, then demanding to know why she wasn't on a concert stage. She heard Harrington's voice, so different from his initial mocking tone, insisting that her talent was being wasted. She felt the keys beneath her fingers, that glorious Steinway responding to her touch in a way her cheap keyboard at home never could. By the time her alarm went off at 5 a.m., she had convinced herself that the whole evening had been a strange dream. People like her, people who cleaned floors and scrubbed bathrooms, didn't suddenly get discovered and whisked away to better lives. That happened in movies, not in reality. She would go to work and everything would be normal again. But when she arrived at the symphony hall, nothing was normal. "Jenkins," Mr. Peterson called out the moment she walked through the staff entrance. His face wore an expression she'd never seen before, something between confusion and reluctant respect.
"My office now." She followed him, her stomach knotting with anxiety.
Was she in trouble? Would she be fired for disrupting the reception? How would she pay her rent, help her sister with tuition? To her surprise, Rose Winters was waiting in Peterson's cramped office, looking perfectly put together despite the early hour. "Good morning, Eleanor," Rose said warmly. "I hope you don't mind that I came early. I thought you might appreciate discussing matters before your shift properly begins. Thank you," Eleanor replied, still expecting to be reprimanded somehow. "I'll leave you two to talk," Peterson said awkwardly, clearly uncomfortable with having a board member in his office. "Just let me know what schedule changes we need to make." He hurried out, closing the door behind him. "Schedule changes?" Eleanor asked. Rose smiled. "I've arranged for you to have some flexibility in your working hours. We have a lot to discuss and some people I'd like you to meet." Over the next hour, Rose laid out a proposal that made Eleanor's head spin. The Symphony Hall Foundation wanted to offer her a special position, part-time work that would allow her to maintain her income while also giving her access to the practice rooms, performance spaces, and most importantly, time to rebuild her career as a pianist. "We're not a charity," Rose explained candidly. "The foundation believes in investing in exceptional talent. What we saw last night was exceptional, Eleanor. Truly exceptional. But I haven't seriously played in years," Eleanor protested. "One good night doesn't mean I'm ready to." "No one's pushing you onto the main stage tomorrow," Rose assured her. "This is about giving you the space and resources to reconnect with your gift, to see what might be possible." Eleanor studied the older woman's face, looking for signs of pity or condescension, but found only genuine interest and respect. "Why?" she asked simply. "Why would you do this for me?" Rose was quiet for a moment. "Let me tell you a story," she said finally. "When I was young, about your age, I was a violinist. Not world-class, but good enough to make a living in orchestras. Then I developed arthritis in my hands." She flexed her fingers, showing the slight stiffness in the joints. It progressed quickly. "Within 2 years, I couldn't play professionally anymore." Eleanor's expression softened with understanding. "I'm sorry, don't be. I found other ways to stay in music. Arts administration, then the board, philanthropy. But I know what it's like to have music in your blood and be unable to pursue it. The difference is my obstacle was physical and permanent. Yours is circumstantial, and circumstances can change." By the time Eleanor left the office, her life had already shifted on its axis. She would continue working at the Symphony Hall, but on a modified schedule. 3 days a week would be dedicated to cleaning, while 2 days would be for practice, lessons with one of the symphony's resident pianists, and gradually rebuilding her performance skills. As she pushed her cleaning cart down the familiar corridor, everything looked different somehow. The same walls, the same floors, but she was seeing them through new eyes. For the first time in years, she had permission to hope. At the end of her shift, Eleanor checked her phone and was stunned to find dozens of notifications. The live stream from the night before had exploded overnight, gathering hundreds of thousands of views. Clips had been shared across multiple platforms, with comments ranging from amazement at her playing, to outrage that someone of her talent was working as a cleaner, to demands that she be given a record deal immediately. There were messages from local news stations wanting interviews, from music blogs seeking her story, even from a few small record labels expressing interest. Most shocking of all was a voicemail from her sister. "Eleanor, what's going on?" Her sister's voice demanded excitedly. "My roommate just showed me a video of you playing piano at the Symphony Hall, and it's everywhere. Why didn't you tell me you were performing again? Call me back right away." Overwhelmed, Eleanor sat down on a bench in the staff locker room. This wasn't what she had expected when she came to work yesterday. Just another invisible person doing an invisible job. Now, suddenly she was visible. Not just visible, but watched, discussed, shared. Part of her wanted to turn off her phone to hide from this unexpected exposure. But another part, a part that had been dormant for too long, felt the stirrings of something that felt dangerously like ambition. When she finally left the building, she was surprised to find Harrington waiting by the staff exit, leaning against a sleek black car. "Ms. Jenkins," he called, straightening up when he saw her. "I was hoping to catch you." Eleanor approached warily. Despite his apparent change of heart the night before, she couldn't forget how he had initially tried to humiliate her. "Mr. Harrington," she acknowledged cautiously. He had the grace to look uncomfortable. "I owe you an apology," he said directly. "What I did last night, trying to make you a source of amusement for my friends, it was cruel and arrogant. I'm deeply sorry." The apology seemed genuine, though Eleanor wasn't quite ready to forgive so easily. "What do you want, Mr. Harrington?" "A chance to make amends," he replied. "And selfishly, a chance to talk about music with someone who clearly understands it on a profound level." He hesitated, then added, "I'd like to invite you to dinner." "Not as a date," he clarified quickly. "As a professional courtesy between musicians. There are some people I think you should meet, some opportunities I might be able to help with." Eleanor studied him carefully. The man before her seemed different from the arrogant pianist of the previous night. Humbled, perhaps by the realization of his mistake, or simply impressed enough by her talent to see her as an equal rather than a servant. "I'm not looking for charity," she said firmly. "This isn't charity," he replied with equal firmness. "This is networking. It's what musicians do for each other. It's what would have happened years ago if circumstances hadn't intervened." After a moment's consideration, Eleanor nodded. "All right, dinner, professional dinner." Over the next weeks, Eleanor's life transformed with dizzying speed. The dinner with Harrington introduced her to several influential people in the classical music world, including the director of a prestigious piano competition that was accepting late applications under exceptional circumstances. Her modified work schedule at the Symphony Hall gave her precious access to professional quality pianos and quiet spaces to practice. Her fingers, which had never fully lost their skill despite years of limited practice on her cheap keyboard, quickly regained their former dexterity and strength. The viral video continued to gather views, spawning news stories, blog posts, and social media debates about privilege, access to arts education, and the invisible talents of ordinary workers. Eleanor had to learn quickly how to handle the attention, politely declining most interview requests to focus on rebuilding her skills. Rose Winters proved to be a steadfast ally, shielding Eleanor from excessive publicity while helping her navigate the unfamiliar waters of music industry interest. Thomas Chen, the critic who had witnessed her initial performance, wrote a glowing profile that further increased interest in her story and her playing. 6 weeks after that fateful night at the reception, Eleanor found herself in a small recital hall at the Symphony, giving her first official performance in nearly a decade. It wasn't a grand public concert, just an informal gathering for symphony staff, board members, and a few invited guests from the music community. But as she walked onto the stage, wearing a simple black dress borrowed from her sister rather than her cleaner's uniform, she felt a sense of rightness that had been missing from her life for far too long. The program was challenging. Bach, Chopin, Debussy, and Rachmaninoff, designed to showcase both her technical skill and emotional range. As she played, she allowed herself to fully inhabit the music in a way she hadn't dared to in years, even in her solitary practice sessions. This wasn't just playing notes. This was telling her story through her fingers, expressing every disappointment, every struggle, every small joy and postponed dream. When she finished the final piece, the same Chopin ballade that had started this journey, the small audience rose as one, their applause seeming to lift her from the bench. She saw Rose Winters wiping away a tear, Thomas Chen nodding in professional approval, even Mr. Peterson looking grudgingly impressed from the back row, and in the front row sat Harrington, the man whose cruel joke had inadvertently changed her life. He wasn't applauding wildly like the others. Instead, he was watching her with an expression of profound respect, one artist acknowledging another. After the recital, as people gathered around to congratulate her, Rose pulled Eleanor aside. "The director of the Westridge Conservatory was here tonight," she said quietly. "They want to offer you a fellowship, teaching some beginner classes in exchange for advanced study, performance opportunities, and a modest stipend." Eleanor's breath caught. The Westridge Conservatory was one of the most respected music schools in the country. the very place she had dreamed of attending before life intervened. "It would mean leaving my job here," she said, thinking of the financial implications, of her sister's tuition, of the security she had worked so hard to maintain. "The fellowship includes housing," Rose continued, "and there's a scholarship fund for family members of faculty and fellows. Your sister would qualify." Eleanor stared at her, unable to fully process how completely her life was changing. "This is really happening, isn't it?" she whispered. "This isn't some elaborate dream I'm going to wake up from?" Rose squeezed her hand gently. "It's really happening, Eleanor. All because you were brave enough to sit down at that piano when most people would have walked away. Or because a famous pianist decided to be cruel," Eleanor added with a small, ironic smile. "Sometimes our worst moments lead to our greatest opportunities," Rose replied. "The question is, are you ready to take this one?" Eleanor looked back at the piano on the stage, gleaming under the lights. For years she had made peace with the death of her dream, had constructed a life that was, if not fulfilling, at least stable. Now she was being asked to risk that stability for another chance at the life she had once wanted so desperately. "Yes," she said finally, feeling both terrified and strangely calm. "I'm ready." 6 months later, Eleanor stood in the wings of Carnegie Hall, her heart pounding so hard she could feel it in her throat. From her position, she could see the gleaming black Steinway waiting center stage illuminated by soft spotlights. Beyond it, the murmur of the audience filled the prestigious venue, a sold-out show that had been announced just 3 weeks earlier. 5 minutes. "Ms. Jenkins," the stage manager whispered. Giving her a reassuring smile, Eleanor nodded, smoothing down the midnight blue gown she wore, a far cry from the cleaning uniform that had defined her for so many years. The dress had been a gift from Rose, who had insisted that Eleanor's first major performance deserved something special. "Not because appearances matter most," Rose had said firmly, "but because sometimes we need outward symbols of our inner transformations." The last 6 months had been a whirlwind of change. After accepting the fellowship at Westridge Conservatory, Eleanor had given notice at the Symphony Hall. On her last day, the entire cleaning staff had surprised her with a small party in the break room, people who had worked alongside her for years without ever knowing the talent she carried silently within her. "We're proud of you, Louise," the head of maintenance had told her gruffly. "You're going to show them all what we've always known, that people like us have dreams and talents just like anybody else." The transition hadn't been easy. After years of physical work and financial struggle, adapting to academic life again had its challenges. There were days when Eleanor questioned her decision, when the pressure of catching up to peers who had never stepped away from music made her doubt herself. But those moments had grown fewer as she settled into her new reality. Her sister had transferred to a college near the conservatory, now on a full scholarship thanks to the program Rose had mentioned. They shared a small apartment provided by the fellowship, rebuilding the close relationship that had been strained by years of Eleanor's constant working and chronic exhaustion. And then had come the invitation that had stunned everyone, even Rose and Harrington, who had become her most steadfast champions. Carnegie Hall wanted her for a special performance, part of a series highlighting extraordinary journeys in classical music. The viral video that had started it all had now been viewed over 10 million times, making Eleanor's story known far beyond classical music circles. 3 minutes, the stage manager whispered, breaking into Eleanor's thoughts. She took a deep breath, thinking of everyone who had helped her reach this moment. Rose, who had seen potential worth nurturing. Harrington, who had moved from tormentor to mentor, spending hours helping her prepare for this performance. Her professors at the conservatory, who had welcomed her as both student and colleague. The countless strangers who had shared her story, demanding that talent like hers be given its proper platform. Most of all, she thought of her mother, who had worked extra shifts to buy that first second-hand piano, who had believed in Eleanor's gift long before anyone else had noticed it. "Music isn't just something you do, Ellie," she had said once. "It's something you are." Eleanor wished desperately that her mother could be here tonight, sitting in the front row, witnessing the fulfillment of the dream they had shared. 2 minutes, came the whisper. Eleanor closed her eyes, centering herself. The program she had chosen was deeply personal, pieces that marked different chapters of her life. Bach, whose mathematical precision had first taught her the discipline music required, Chopin, whose emotional depths had spoken to her teenage heart, Debussy, whose impressionistic beauty had sustained her during the darkest times, and for the finale, a piece she had composed herself during these transformative months, telling her story not with words but with music. 1 minute. She opened her eyes to see Harrington approaching, elegant in his tuxedo. In the months since their first encounter, their relationship had evolved into a complex friendship based on mutual respect and a shared devotion to music. "Nervous?" he asked quietly. "Terrified," she admitted. He nodded, understanding completely. "Channel it into the music. Let it fuel you, not stop you." He hesitated, then added, "I was so wrong about you, Eleanor. I need you to know that I understand that now." "You've more than made up for it," she replied honestly. Their initial encounter, him mocking her, treating her as a source of amusement rather than a human being with dignity and worth, had long since been overshadowed by his tireless efforts to help her rebuild her career. "Ms. Jenkins, it's time," the stage manager said. Harrington squeezed her hand briefly. "You already know what I'm going to say," she smiled. "That the piano is just wood and wire until I make it speak." "Exactly. Now go make it tell your story." Eleanor took a final deep breath and walked onto the stage. The applause that greeted her was thunderous, much of the audience already familiar with her journey through media coverage and social media. But as she took her position at the piano and the hall quieted, she knew that applause meant nothing now. It was what came after the music that would matter. She began with Bach's Prelude in C major, simple, pure, the perfect foundation. Her fingers found the keys with the certainty of coming home after a long journey. As she played, memories flowed through her. Her mother's proud smile at her first recital, the elderly church pianist who had given her free lessons, the regional competition she had won at 16, giving her the first hint that her talent might be truly special. She moved seamlessly into Chopin's Nocturne in E-flat major, allowing its poignant melody to express all the bittersweet years of watching her dreams slip away. Her mother's illness, the hard choices, the gradually increasing weight of adult responsibilities that had pulled her away from music. The Debussy piece, Rêverie, spoke of the in-between years, when she had cleaned the symphony hall by day and played her cheap keyboard by night, keeping the spark of her passion alive even when it seemed pointless to do so. Throughout each piece, Eleanor remained fully present, inhabiting the music completely. The audience disappeared, the pressures vanished, and there was only the perfect communion between artist and instrument. This was why she had never been able to fully let go of music, even when logic suggested she should move on. This feeling, this sense of being exactly where she belonged, doing exactly what she was meant to do, couldn't be replicated by anything else in her life. When she reached her own composition, titled simply Return, she felt a new kind of vulnerability. This wasn't interpreting someone else's work. This was offering her own soul to the audience, raw and unfiltered. The piece began softly, hesitantly, like someone testing forgotten skills. Gradually it built in confidence and complexity, incorporating subtle references to the cleaning work that had sustained her, rhythmic motifs that echoed the sweeping of floors, the wiping of surfaces, the humble repeated movements that had filled her days while music waited patiently in her heart. The middle section turned darker, more dissonant, expressing the night when Harrington had tried to humiliate her, the anger, the shame, but also the defiance that had made her sit down at that piano instead of walking away. And then came the transformation, the music opening up into something triumphant yet humble, grateful yet confident. The final movement wasn't about victory or revenge. It was about reconciliation, with her past, with her detractors, with the parts of herself she had tried to suppress for so long. As the final notes faded into silence, Eleanor kept her hands on the keys, head bowed slightly, allowing herself to fully experience the completion of this particular journey. For several heartbeats, the entire hall remained absolutely still, as if no one dared to break the spell she had cast. Then came the applause, starting slowly, building to a roar, and finally culminating in a standing ovation that seemed to shake the very foundations of the historic hall. Eleanor rose from the bench, overwhelmed by the response. From her position on stage, she could see Rose in the front row, applauding with tears streaming down her face. Beside her sat Eleanor's sister, beaming with pride. In the wing stood Harrington, nodding in professional approval and personal vindication. As Eleanor took her bows, she spotted something unexpected: a group of people in the third row, all wearing the dark blue uniforms of the Symphony Hall cleaning staff. Louise had organized a bus, bringing as many of her former colleagues as could get the night off to witness her triumph. They were on their feet, cheering loudly, some wiping away tears, others pumping their fists in the air as if her victory belonged to all of them, which, in many ways, it did. When the applause finally began to subside, Eleanor stepped forward to the microphone that had been set up at the front of the stage. "Thank you," she said simply, her voice steady despite the emotion welling in her chest. "Music has been the constant in my life, sometimes at the center, sometimes pushed to the margins, but always there. I'm grateful to everyone who helped me find my way back to it." She paused, gathering her thoughts, then continued. "But I'm especially grateful for the years I spent cleaning floors at the Symphony Hall." This statement caused a ripple of surprise through the audience. "Those years taught me patience, humility, and the value of work done with care, even when no one is watching. They taught me that worth isn't determined by applause or recognition, but by how we show up each day regardless of who's paying attention." She looked directly at the section where her former colleagues sat. "I stand here tonight not despite being a cleaning lady, but partly because of it. Those years are as much a part of me as the music you just heard." The applause that followed this statement was, if possible, even more thunderous than before. As Eleanor took her final bow and exited the stage, she was met by Harrington, who had watched the entire performance from the wings. "I was wrong about one more thing," he said thoughtfully. "What's that?" Eleanor asked, still buzzing with adrenaline from the performance and the overwhelming response. "I thought I was offering you a way back into the music world," he said. "But you never really left it, did you? You just found a different way to live there." Eleanor considered this, then nodded slowly. "Music isn't just concert halls and recordings. It's how you hear the world, how you move through it. I was playing all along, just without an audience." "Well," he said, gesturing toward the continuing applause from the hall, "you certainly have one now." As Eleanor prepared for her encore, she thought about the journey that had brought her here. From the little girl practicing on a secondhand piano, to the cleaning lady playing in empty halls after hours, to this moment of public recognition. The path hadn't been straight or easy, but standing here now, she wouldn't change a single step. She walked back onto the stage, sat down at the piano, and began to play once more. Not for the applause or the vindication, but for the pure joy of finally being exactly who she was meant to be.